How much is it going to cost, and what are you doing?
Welcome to the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider, where legal experts tear down contracts from some of the most well-known companies and high-profile executives around the world.
In this episode, business attorney Jeffrey Pomeranz digs into the Tesla solar panel purchase agreement. This is a consumer contract, but for a very large purchase. And Jeffrey focuses on how the contract process can get in the way of a sales cycle. So, let's tear it down. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider. I'm Mike Whalen. The purpose of this show is exactly what it sounds like. We take contracts, we beat them up, we're sort of mean, occasionally nice, but not often. I hang out with smart people like my buddy Jeffrey Pomeranz, who is here. How are you, Jeffrey?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Cool. I'm excited because we get to talk about a sexy technology that happens to be in the news today because Elon Musk's dad is a creep. We are talking about Tesla Energy Products Purchase and Home Improvement Agreement. Let me show this to you guys. Before we dig into this thing, I'm thinking this is like the battery side of the business, right, Jeffrey? What is this document? Where are we going to see this kind of document?
It's to install solar panels on homes.
Got it. And so what's it representative of? Like, why are we talking about it on this show? What can this teach us as we root into this particular document, thinking about, what people are going to be able to pull from it?
So depending on industry, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. So whether it's B2B, B2C, I think contracts, there's always opportunity to have them be shorter, fewer words is less ideal. Just because you add more words to a sentence or a paragraph or to a paragraph, it's not going to necessarily improve it. Sometimes you get ambiguity with it. So you can keep your documents streamlined and concise. You're probably going to shorten your sales cycle and not necessarily reduce the risk mitigation that you're aiming for.
Right. Yeah. And this kind of product is targeted to consumers. So there's an interesting, probably a savvy consumer, but there's an interesting, like, how much do you talk with these people? But let's talk about you. What's your background? What's bringing you to documents like this? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I worked initially at a law school and for about a decade in-house. I worked for two rather large privately held companies, one multinational publicly traded company. And after about a decade, I opened up my own firm almost 4 years ago. And I'm seeing this type of document a lot more on the consumer side. But I think some of the elements that we'll go through today highlight some really good drafting techniques for your audience and things that I'll call out that you can really benefit from in any type of relationship.
Cool. That's perfect. So what we're going to do, Jeffrey, is I'll lead people into this document, and we'll just go through some of the points that you had to add, and obviously wherever you want to add some insight. So let's start at the beginning. This is the product's purchase and home improvement agreement, and you've got some predicate stuff, some purchase order looking, language, all incorporated into the agreement. There's a price sheet and stuff. So talk to me about the initial, identifying the parties, the section with the customer signing it. Tell me about this sort of predicate one-pager purchase order type part of the document.
Okay. So I think overall, maybe just taking a step back from the preamble and just overall structure, having a document that you can put in front of whomever it may be. Let's just use a client as this is. It's nice if you can give them something that they can look at, it's digestible, and it identifies really what they care about. How much is it going to cost, and what are you doing for them?
Right.
And if you can get past that initial hurdle, then worry about the terms and conditions. And I do this in my own engagement agreement with prospective clients. I've structured this for large institutions and smaller businesses that do $1 million to $10 million in revenue. It's applicable across the board. So in this one, you do have this general price sheet. If you scroll down, it shows the systems that are being installed. But just at the very top, use of the word, or when you're defining an entity, and in this case, it's you, which whoever's signing it, and the Tesla entity, we, us, or our. It's a really nice shorthand where it makes it more digestible, again, depending on who your audience is. So if you're working with consumers, define them as you and you as us, or we, or our.
Right.
That approach, rather than company and client, where
Right.
someone's going through it and it comes off as very legalese. Ultimately, you have the same result. It's just more digestible. Again, whether or not people read this is a completely separate conversation, but I'm just being realistic with it. But if they are, it's something that an ordinary person can get through. And if you're in a consumer type space, it's probably better to draft things in this manner. The second sentence talks about the price sheet, which is below, and then any attached terms and conditions, which, again, it's a nice shorthand. And throughout this document, they actually do a good job of referencing a privacy policy, a specific warranty for a particular type of product. So if you find yourself not wanting to overcomplicate a document, it's a good shorthand if you can incorporate those other documents by reference.
Right.
Salesforce has a really robust library on their platform where they'll give you a short 1 or 2 page document, and then they have all different types of contracts available online, which they archive and then update from time to time. So depending on your sophistication level and the structure of your business, the one you're representing, these are all nice techniques to present something that anyone can look at and not feel like, why am I getting a 15-page contract?
Right. Right. And speaking of the structure, to your point, there's sort of the one-pager, purchase information, and then they jump down to what they're calling the terms and conditions. So here's the rest of the more legal sounding, the stuff that you hope people will go through and keep reading, but they probably don't. So let's jump into that. Talk to me about section 1 there, just the purchase information. Sure.
So in this case, it's a really nice way, and I'm complimentary because it's a good document.
Yeah.
It wasn't much to quote unquote tear down. But in this, if you are selling something, define that. We are selling you X and you are buying Y. Affirmative obligation going both ways. Not all purchase type agreements do a very good job of spelling that out. And if you're ever getting to the point of enforceability, you want to make it clear, you have an obligation to buy from us. And that's what section 1 is. But if you look at it, very few of the sections, and as we scroll through, you'll see, exceed 6-7 lines. Like the warranty section is a little bit robust. I know I'm jumping ahead, but
sure.
Overall, they're able to address these, I won't even say complex concepts, but they address each of these points in a very simplistic way. So,
and they do that with that sort of directness. Moving on to price, there's quite a bit in here about how they're trying to push off different kinds of liability. Talk to us about Section 2 and Section 3, talking about eligibility for rebates and incentives, and then again changes to the price sheet. What's Tesla doing with these sections?
So I think we've seen in the last year and a half in response to COVID, and then what happened with the canal getting blocked for whatever period of time that was. Yeah. A lot of industries have been impacted, not being able to receive shipment or factories not being open. Heavy in the construction industry. So if you're providing a service or supplying goods and you're relying on a third party, whatever, say we're in the middle, whatever you're selling widgets, or in this case, the systems. If you have hard terms with your vendor, you need to make sure that whatever you have with your vendor, you can pass on to your client and vice versa. So you're not the one in the middle left holding the bag. So to give you something specific, if Tesla, for instance, needs to buy a part from a supplier and the pricing jumps 3 times, Tesla needs the ability to pass it on to the client. And that's what Section 3 does. So if you're looking at selling something and there's a longer runway, which in this industry there is because there's permitting involved, they need to send someone out to actually look at the overall system that's going to be installed. So it's not just a quick one-off. There might be a 6-month runway from start to finish. And I don't know what Tesla does, but just speaking in the industry as a whole, if the pricing jumps during that period of time, there needs to be some flexibility to pass that cost on the client. And that's what they've done in Section 3. And if you as a client don't want to pay that increased price, then you can cancel. You're just out the $100 order that you paid.
Right.
So big picture is understand what your client's selling. And if there's a potential for pricing to increase because of the runway, make sure that the client has the ability to remain nimble in its pricing with its client.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Whalen. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Contract Teardown Show. Real quick, I want to ask you to do me/you really a quick favor. Look down below. You'll see a discount code to join the Law Insider Premium subscription. When you do that, you get access to more content like this. You'll see webinars, daily tips on contract drafting, not to mention access to the world's largest database of sample contracts and clauses. It will help you write better contracts faster. If you want to do it right now, there's a code below, so get there. Also, if you're part of a larger team, if you're in-house or in a law firm, just email us. We're at sales@lawinsider.com. We'll make sure you get a deal as well. Come join us in the community. The code is below. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, and speaking outside, parties that you do and do not have control over, in Section 4, they even give some power to an outside party that they do, in fact, have control over. What about installation and service? It specifically says installation will be performed by us, our affiliate, or subcontractor. What do you think about this authorization for the subcontractor to come in?
Pretty standard. If you are providing the service, you want to have the ability to engage subs. Doesn't surprise me that they have local installers. It's a good way to shift risk and make sure you have subject matter experts. What I do find interesting, though, and I apologize, but I'm gonna jump ahead.
Sure.
In Section 13, sub 5, they talk about the carve-outs or the exclusions to the warranties that they're providing. And it says any material or equipment connected to your product that was not installed by us. So at the very beginning, I mentioned who's us. Us is the Tesla entity. But now if they have their subcontractor installing it, now I question whether or not that warranty is excluded or whether or not there's actually a warranty that's effective. My guess is this was not the intent. They probably should have said by us or one of our subs or affiliates. So it could be poor drafting, could be intentional, but something that I would want to make sure, because that would not be well received if I was representing someone who had one of these systems installed and then we try to exercise our rights under the warranty and Tesla denied it, which is probably when I would get brought in. And if that was the case and I go here and if Tesla said, look, we didn't install it, even though it was one of their subs, that could be an interesting situation.
Yeah. And speaking of sort of the ability to change things, I'm looking at 5 and it talks about the price sheet and makes reference to changing prices in the price sheet. It's interesting, this relationship between this part of the document and that price sheet. Talk to me about that. Like if they're not incorporated, why include it all in one document? Why not have two different documents? What's the relationship between these two pieces according to sections like Section 5?
I mean, there's technically it's one document because it's, it shows up in PDF format, as I'm sure through some e-sign, platform, but you really could think of them as discrete entities. You have a price sheet and simply incorporates the other document by reference, but they're smart here because they say you agree to pay whatever is in the price sheet. And Section 4, which we were just looking at, or 3 rather, where if there are changes to the price sheet, you're paying those if you're going to continue moving forward with installing our system, even if our pricing increases. So just looking at how they've structured it, Tesla hasn't internalized any risk. They're saying if our prices go up, you're paying more. If you don't want to pay more, then we won't install it for you.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you jump down to 8, they do what I've seen is pretty common in these situations, which is to have an outside document of a privacy policy. What do you think about doing that? I mean, some parts are all together, but they're sort of separate, and here's an explicitly separate document. Do you like that kind of approach, or do you think privacy terms should also be in this same document?
I think to the extent you're able to have one privacy policy govern all contracts, it's probably in your best interest. So whatever, my guess is this privacy policy is the same one that they use for their vehicles. I didn't go back and look at that, but as companies grow and one of the challenges they'll have is contract management, contract compliance, and putting in those controls so you're not having disparate terms based on whoever's touching a particular document. So this is actually, aside from keeping the document shorter, you're also creating a really nice control, because if you have to update your privacy policy, you don't have to remember to go in and update this equipment purchase agreement, your whatever terms and conditions govern the software and that's in a car and whatever other products that they're selling.
Right.
It's just one privacy policy for the entity or the entities globally. And the more that companies can do that, better off they are. The challenge, though, is you need a location for those terms and conditions to be housed. And if you update them, you need to archive them. Because if there were to be some type of dispute, well, which was the governing privacy policy at the time that this dispute arose?
Right.
So that's really the only drawback, is you need that infrastructure. But if you have it, it's without question best practices.
Well, and speaking of privacy, I'm noticing in 10 something that's interesting, that essentially you're going to agree to allow monitoring. I've got tools that, my Apple phone and Google will say, we want you to affirmatively agree that we can monitor your use of the tool. Not so here. Do you like Section 10 and the way they're handling that monitoring?
I mean, you effectively are, right? If you're signing it, you are agreeing to it.
Right.
But this is, I think most people that are obtaining this type of system understand that there needs to be a communication between the improvement that was done to the home, i.e. the installation of this solar system, and the company who is making sure the software is working and that the energy that's being received by the panels is fully optimized, and you're recognizing the benefit, which is why your utility bill will be heavily or reduced or eliminated.
Right.
So they do need to talk. And I mean, I think people would be naive to think that with all the technology out there that there isn't some type of oversight from third parties.
Well, and it gives this affirmative duty that you have to maintain your internet connection, right? Like this is if you're trying to live off grid, right? That might be one of the reasons that you have this tool, these solar panels, is because you want to live off grid, and yet you have to maintain an internet connection. And then in 11, it continues to talk about that to a degree in what I think is a standard bit of language, that you got to use the thing right? We're not going to own risk if you don't operate according to the owner's manual. What do you think about that section, number 11?
Pretty commonplace. I mean, I would expect this, but again, when I'm looking, the reason I picked this document is I liked the brevity of it. And if I'm looking at a maintenance and operation section, again, giving reference to an owner's manual, which may change from time to time, it keeps it nimble. So the Tesla in this case is not locked into their one manual that they issue on this particular day. It's nice when your contracts can do that. You just need to be careful that it doesn't become illusory where, and I've seen this, as I'm sure anyone listening to this conversation has, where someone will try to slip in, we can modify the terms in our sole discretion and don't provide you notice. And at that point, you might be dealing with an illusory agreement, because if one party can just change it, then you don't really have a contract. By contrast here, they're simply saying we may update our owner's manual and they'll give you notice of it. But you've already bought the system, so it's kind of a moot point.
Right. Yeah, and they're trying to keep going with handling that risk allocation. In 13 and 14, the sections that we often talk about, what's excluded from the warranty and what's the limitation of liability. What do you think about 13 and 14?
So robust, it's actually interesting. If you look at 12 limited warranties, it's very narrow, and I referenced it before with respect to the inverter. There's a specific there's a reference document that I guess you could find online with a arbitration provision, which they call out. And actually this agreement has arbitration as well, but the warranty is pretty narrow. Exclusions are pretty robust. Again, just shifting risk back to the consumer. We're only going to be responsible for those things that we touch and come in the design of what we've done. But if there's any type of force majeure or events beyond their control, your failure to maintain and operate products. And again, this is a good tie back to the operations manual, because at some point they're going to establish it's not really case law, but internally it will be of, you know what, we don't really do a great job of disclaiming that responsibility in the operations manual, or we've had some issues with it. It gives them the ability to update it, and then your failure as the homeowner not to maintain your system in accordance with that updated manual would provide Tesla the opportunity to deny warranty coverage.
Yeah, speaking of, I was thinking about arbitration. If you go down to 18, we've talked about arbitration before on the show, and it's interesting to me that this is sort of tucked into the end, which is often true, but whether, arbitration clauses can often be really troublesome. And I'm looking at this, I see no capital letters, I see no bold, it just is like a standard absurdly long paragraph like the other paragraphs. But what do you think of this agreement to arbitrate? Do you like where it's located? Do you like how it's written? What do you think about it?
Well, governing law up in 17 is the state where the products are located, which I actually find interesting. I mean, they may just do it from a compliance standpoint, because some states may require that if there's some type of improvement on a home, you have to litigate in that particular state,
Right.
or that governing law would apply. Arbitration doesn't surprise me. I've dealt with other large institutions before, and it gives Tesla the ability not to be in the court system because they're in arbitration. And if each party is paying their own way, like I've seen other companies do that, I don't recall if this one said who's responsible, but typically each side will pay for the arbitration. There's a nice barrier to entry. Court is a filing fee. Arbitration can get expensive because you're paying effectively a third attorney to oversee whatever the dispute is. So
Right.
It's a good way to stay out of the system. They will have probably a nice relationship with the arbitration group that's handling it.
Sure.
And I'm not saying there's a bias there, but if they're seeing the same case over and over and over, they're going to have a pretty good handle as far as how these things are going to play out. So it makes sense, again, if you're looking at a large institution and ways to mitigate your exposure, this is a nice way to do it, especially if you're dealing with consumers.
Right.
Yeah. As a consumer, really want to go arbitrate.
Right. Speaking of, I mean, stepping back to the big picture, you've made reference to what you want a consumer document to look like. This is an interesting thing because I don't know. This feels very different to me than I downloaded a game app on my phone and I got to click through a bunch of approvals in order to go play the game. If you're buying solar panels from Tesla, you are spending some money. And
yeah, this
they talk about finance. Like, do you think for the size of, I would expect somebody to read this more thoroughly than they would a game app, but maybe not. Do you like the way this is presented? It's a consumer contract, but it's fairly long, but you know what I mean? What do you think this is right size for the right problem?
I think if you're able to take any contract and make it into a digestible format, it's going to improve your sales cycle. And just, again, if this was the same document, and you can talk about types, font type, font size, spacing in the document, all those little things, they matter. And it's very easy to do a very formal contract that you would expect to receive from a big law firm on some type of M&A activity. And that's fine, right? Because you're dealing with sophisticated parties on each side. If that's not your target audience, though, it's like anything else, right? Like, who's your audience? We're having this conversation. We're talking about contracts. So we're going through a contract and trying to offer some value. Who's your client? And if the reader of that is someone that is spending, this is like a couple $100,000, make it easy for them. It will shorten your sales cycle. And if they've done a good job of making it nimble, malleable to the particular situation. If we didn't touch it, but there's one section talking about if there's some other products, some other terms and conditions would apply. So they have like a catch-all in there. So it can be for anything that they sell. It's just a nice way to structure your document. So Big picture, keep it simple. And if you're able, take out document or sections that might apply across the board. So it keeps that document lighter for the reader.
Yeah, my dad, who was a sales manager my whole life growing up, he used to always say, the more you have to educate the customer, the longer it's going to take the customer to decide to buy the thing. And you really don't want your salespeople giving legal counsel on how to read one of these things. So, yeah, I like where your head's at there in terms of keeping it brief enough to fill the function and make sure that the sale happens, because that's all Tesla cares about anyway, is making the sale happen. So very cool. I appreciate you hanging out with us. I appreciate your insights, Jeffrey. If people want to learn more about what you do and connect with you, what's the best way to reach out?
Sure. I'm been very active on LinkedIn, so please do follow if you've enjoyed this. And if you'd like to reach out directly, my website is pomeranzlaw.com.
Awesome. And we'll have all that information and this document in the blog post over at lawinsider.com/resources. And if you want to be a guest on the show, maybe you can be a little more mean about the contract than Jeffrey was and beat it up, just email us at we're at community@lawinsider.com. We will see you guys next time. Thank you again, Jeffrey. Y'all have a good day.
My pleasure. Thank you.